Hello, everyone, and welcome to the Hardware Unboxed podcast for episode 1. In this episode, we're going to tell you what is this podcast, what's going on, how can you listen and do things like that. And then we've just spent, I think it's like an hour and a half, nearly an hour and a half, talking about the Gamers Nexus, Linus Tech Tips, errors, ethical issues video. So lots of discussion about how we test things, testing methodology, some of the things that may be going wrong at Linus Tech Tips at the moment. We look into the Billet Labs thing. We just give our thoughts on how they handled that and just our general thoughts as well on Linus Tech Tips and whether they are a net benefit or net negative for the tech scene in general. So all that's coming up. Yeah, let's get into it. All right, Steve. We're doing a podcast, the Hardware Unboxed podcast. How are you doing?
I'm doing great. Well, it's been an interesting day so far, a lot of things going on, but I'm personally doing great. Got a good night's sleep last night, feeling pretty fresh, and I'm excited to have a chat with you for the first ever podcast. So it's kind of cool to do it this way.
Should be awesome. Yeah, sort of based on some of our, would you say it's like private chats? Like often when there's a product coming out or something, we'll have a bit of a discussion, you and I, about results or other people's reviews or things like that. We just thought, you know what, maybe other people would be interested. Maybe a podcast would be appropriate for that sort of thing. So I guess that's what we're doing right now.
Yeah, I think almost every conversation we've had over the last few years, we've finished our 1 hour back and forth, and you're like, wow, this would have been pretty good content for the main channel. So yeah, we do a bit of that in our Patreon stuff behind the scenes, but I think this podcast should be a better format for doing it on, and more people will get to see it. So hopefully that works out as being a good thing.
I hope so. Yeah, just aiming for it to be very casual, very Q&A-like. I know some of you have appreciated our longer answers in the Q&A sections. The sort of unscripted content, because most of our content is scripted. Like we do work hard on the scripts and things. So a bit of a more casual chat will hopefully get people involved. This will be an audio-focused podcast. So if you are watching it on the new Hardware Unboxed podcast YouTube channel, you'll see our sexy faces, I guess, but the aim isn't to have heaps of video, like no charts or anything. No, like you don't have to watch the video to get this content. You should be able to subscribe in your Spotify feed or Pocket Casts or Apple Podcasts or stuff to figure that out. So hopefully I'll be able to get it working, but audio focus, so you can listen to it while you're doing things. Yeah, we're sort of hoping for it to be like a weekly show. I think probably this episode will go out on like a Tuesday or something, but probably later in the week will be our normal release schedule. And yeah, just sort of like an hour of news, of interesting topics. We don't get a lot of opportunity these days to cover news as it happens. So often we're waiting for the Q&As or waiting for our monthly live streams. So hopefully the podcast will, if there's interesting news topics or leaks or things to cover, then the podcast is really going to be the place for that. And hopefully over time we'll get some guests in for some interesting perspectives as well.
Yeah, no, it's going to be good. It'll definitely be a fun way for us to mix it up and get some of the conversations we'd be having anyway out there. And yeah, it'll be interesting and enjoyable, hopefully, for those that would find this stuff interesting and enjoyable. And I mean, we've chosen a pretty bad week to start this because there's just nothing going on. There's no juicy topics to talk about. There's really nothing, but we'll make the most of it, won't we, Tim?
I think we will. Yeah, it's probably, we've been planning this for a couple of weeks now, the podcast, getting everything set up. And it just so happens this morning we wake up and Gamers Nexus has made a video about Linus Tech Tips and the quality of their content, which was a very interesting watch. And we haven't talked about it yet between us, just a few very brief notes. So this is kind of our first reactions between you and me about this video.
Yeah. I woke up and I did my usual routine, got out to the office, and I'm like, while I'm having my coffee, what can I relax and watch? And I've gone to my subscription feed, which admittedly there's not a lot of tech channels on my personal account because I don't want to watch a lot of that stuff since I live and breathe it. But I do have Gamers Nexus on my personal account. And so I'm scrolling through and I'm like, I don't really want to watch that. I don't want to watch that. And then that thumbnail's jumped out at me. I'm like, is this, not to say clickbait, but is this something different than what I initially thought it might be? Because I didn't know this was coming from Steve from Gamers Nexus. I speak with Steve quite a bit. I've spoken to him just over the last few days, and he's not mentioned anything. The whole comment from LTT Labs that started this, I know Steve saw that. They didn't make any comment about it, so I didn't think they were were going to bother, which is fair enough. And then saw the video, started watching it, and I was like, oh, okay, this is very spicy. All right. So and obviously we have a lot of, not just about the GN video, I suppose, just about the whole situation, benchmarking. We just have a broad range of thoughts, I suppose, which we'll work through over the next hour or however long it takes.
Yeah, and I think we should probably start with those comments that you made on Twitter and the comments in the LTT Labs tour video. So basically, we're I don't know whether this started there. It's kind of there's a broad range of issues that Gamers Nexus covered, but more recently, as people were going through LTX, a channel made this tour of the LTT Labs, and one of the employees working at the labs made some comments about their testing at the labs versus the testing at Hardware Unboxed and Gamers Nexus. And I think you thought that the comment was inaccurate. It was inaccurate. I think that's fair to say. And you decided to clarify that on Twitter. That's how it played out?
I thought so. I didn't think there was too much in it, to be honest. I saw someone on our Discord linked us to the video because I don't remember the channel, sorry, that did the interview, but that's not important. But I got linked to it, and I'm like, what's this about? The guys were all making a bit of a big deal about it on the Hardware Unboxed Discord. I watched it. I was like, oh, okay. Wasn't expecting that. The comments, a bit left of field. They weren't accurate in my opinion, and they just seemed unnecessary. And it's just not something I wanted to see from the LTT guys. I don't know where it came from, but basically the comment was that what differentiates them from Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed is they do updated testing. So new products get new benchmarks, which I think goes without saying, but I think what they're meaning to say is that all of the data is updated, and that, I guess they're insinuating there that we don't do that, which is not the case at all. We fully validate our data for all day one reviews. You guys who watch us will often hear me say, all of this data is fresh, all of this data is new. I spent the last 2 weeks updating everything for this big product because it's a major release. And then, of course, all the head-to-heads that we do weekly, basically. I think at this point, that's basically what I'm spending most of my time doing. All of that data is 100% new, never seen before for that video. Generally, I don't make too much of a big deal out of that. It's kind of just known that we put a lot of time and effort into our benchmarking. So to have someone who is clearly not that familiar with our content make that kind of claim, it didn't upset me a whole lot. I just thought, oh, that's not true. And that comment seemed a bit unnecessary. Wasn't aware of the full context, but I mean, I saw what I saw. So I just made a bit of a tweet. And look, I probably could have just said, LTT's made a statement here about, or insinuated that we don't update our testing like they're doing, but just to let you know, we do validate our testing. Our data is always up to date and accurate. I could have just left it at that. I suppose that would have been a sort of a PR response, let's say. But we don't, I guess when people are like, oh, that was unprofessional or whatever, it's like, yeah, maybe that's true, but we're not a PR firm. We don't have someone, like, what would you rather? Would you rather Harbor Unbox be handled by someone else manages those accounts, or do you want it just to be raw and our honest, like, sort of knee-jerk reaction to this stuff? I mean, people's opinions on that will vary, but what you get from us is very real. It's our opinions, and I think ultimately my response was pretty harmless. I think I made a bit of a jab. I added emoji in there. I said something like, we rerun and have updated our benchmark data more times than, or more than Linus has spent in terms of money on labs and staff. It was just some silly little throwaway comment like that.
It's a bit of Australian humor too. Like the way we operate over here is a bit different. Like if you come from the US, it's just a bit of a different culture. We take a few jabs and things every time. It's lighthearted. At least that's the intention. Yeah,
and I'm a bit more annoying like that than say Tim. Tim doesn't do as much of the, I don't know, as us Aussies would call it, sort of a piss take. Because what we do is so serious and has to be so accurate and so technically correct and all that sort of stuff. I do so much of that when we're not doing that, I like to just sort of joke around and have a bit of fun, even at my own expense. And I guess that is very Australian. And that always doesn't come across very well in those tweets. And I guess that's the problem. And I'm sort of aware of it, but I still do it anyway, probably more than I should.
Yourself.
I honestly, I can't help myself. That's it. So, but at the end of the day, I don't think anything I said there was terribly offensive or was like that dramatic or drama infused or whatever you want to call it. It was just a little bit of a tongue-in-cheek sort of thing. Didn't warrant anywhere near the response it got. I think some of my follow-up comments were a bit more divisive, let's say, where I said, the LTT guys have made some pretty bad mistakes in their benchmark results in the past. Not really good enough. We shouldn't be seeing as many major mistakes from them as we do. And look, I'm not saying that you should never make mistakes. We're all human. We make mistakes. We've made mistakes before. We don't make nearly as many as what we've seen from LTT in recent times. But if you're going to make statements and comparisons like that about other people, you kind of want your work to be of a very, very high standard. But
Yeah, you're inviting it a little bit. When you make a comment like that, you sort of, we do this and other people don't do this. The implication is sort of that what you're doing to differentiate yourself makes your content better.
Mhm.
And that's only the way I took. I wasn't offended or anything by the comment. I was
No.
just like, oh, that was an interesting one. But that pretty much brings us to the Gamers Nexus video, because while you were sort of making some of those comments about Gamers Nexus, I mean, Linus Tech Tips, testing not being necessarily up to scratch,
Mhm.
the Gamers Nexus video is like all of that. The dial has been dialed up to 10, broken, set to 12, then broken again, because there were many examples in their video of errors that they've made. It's interesting because I see some of those errors, and I think the one thing, as you've said, everyone makes mistakes, right? Like we've made mistakes on the channel, we've made corrections, and things go wrong. Sometimes you don't catch something, or something just doesn't go right. You make an error, you accidentally copy the wrong data into a
It's easy
into a
done.
chart, into a spec table. That always happens. But I think one of the issues that was really highlighted by Gamers Nexus video, and something that we've chatted about before, is that some of the errors really should be getting caught by someone in the production pipeline. Like,
Yeah.
just some of the margins and things are larger than what is possible from those parts. Like you compare one GPU to another GPU and it's like 300% faster, as was shown with that 4090 example. And then, surely something like that should be being caught by someone in the production process. And I think that's where I get a bit frustrated by some of the LTT content, is when, like making a small mistake, like getting the cache of a CPU wrong because you've copied and pasted it from the wrong thing. Sure, okay, I can sort of forgive that. But a major error like that, which is so visible in a chart, I guess just doesn't really show much oversight into what's going on.
Yeah, I think as Steve from Gamers Nexus said, it exposes a lack of experience, because I think, well, certainly myself, Steve from Gamers Nexus, you as well, even though you don't do a whole lot of GPU testing, that results straight away. Like you would only need to glance at that graph for a nanosecond and you'd be like, I've got a question. There seems to be some data there that doesn't make sense. I don't even know how something like that makes it to the final product. And generally when I make or do a day one review, I do that largely myself. So we've now got a video editor, Balin, who collects all of the B-roll, edits the video in, and once he's finished doing that, then I'll proof it and make sure there's no mistakes. But I'm just one set of eyes and one brain, and sometimes I say dumb stuff and I hear it again and it just doesn't register as being dumb stuff. So I'll get Tim to watch the content. And then basically once Balin's watched it, I've watched it, and Tim's watched it, we're pretty good to send it. And even then, sometimes something small may slip through and we'll have to pin a comment. But generally speaking, they're usually pretty good. We certainly haven't released anything like what Gamers Nexus showed in that video. But also, people have brought these things to our attention before. It gets posted on our Discord. And I'm talking about the LTT data being very wrong. People let us know about it. But my response has sort of been, I'm not the benchmark police. Like, I'm not out here to try and tear LTT down or point to their mistakes, because as you have acknowledged and I've acknowledged, we're only human as well. It'd be very hypocritical of us to say, oh, LTT made a mistake here, everyone give them a hard time, because we've made mistakes before. It happens. And I'm not saying either that's what Gamers Nexus were doing. Gamers Nexus were more like, look, when you call us out by name, you want to make sure, as I said earlier, that all of your stuff is buttoned up and perfect. And here is some really bad things that you've overlooked, and here's some of the smaller stuff. And Steve said, look, the smaller stuff, we can kind of forgive, pin a comment. We make mistakes as well, but you can't have these big, huge errors regularly happening and, name us as one of the media outlets that you do something better than. Like, Gamers Nexus, I consider to be the golden standard for day one reviews. They're certainly up there as some of the best day one reviews. And
Yep.
if I was ever going to call Gamers Nexus out and say, we do something better, or I want to see this better from Gamers Nexus, I'd want to make sure that my last 6 videos had been pretty well flawless. So, as you say, you open yourself up to criticism there when you make those comments. And look, if I made a comment about LTT often being wrong or having issues, and I did that in a tweet or a video, then if people pointed out that we make mistakes as well, I'd just cop that on the chin. I'd be like, yeah.
Again, making mistakes is fine. No issue with making mistakes, but making mistakes is a learning exercise. You make a mistake and it's all about your response and how you learn from that and improve for next time. And I swear that every time that we have made some sort of error, especially a bigger error, something that would require us to edit a video, take down a video, pin a correction. So not like copying a table wrong, so you get a spec wrong, but like a data error or something like that. You learn from that for next time. So you sort of go, oh, well, I didn't quite correctly, configure that game. So the testing data turned out to be wrong, or, we realized too late that every time you restart the game, the settings changes. So by the time we got to production, it turns out that we had overlooked that. So next time we're going to make sure we go through and we check every setting after every restart. And even things like monitor testing where, we miss things like scan lines in a monitor or something. I'm like, okay, well, I didn't really have much of a test process for that. So people bring it into your attention. You're like, you missed this in your content. You didn't cover this. It's a really important deal breaker flaw or something. So you implement that for the next time. And I think one of the issues with the LMG stuff, again, isn't making the mistakes. It's that they're making mistakes and then repeating the mistakes in a future video. So they're not necessarily learning from making those sorts of errors. So, many of those examples that Gamers Nexus brought up were over quite a span of time where there were inconsistencies, people not noticing results that don't make sense. And I would have thought that after, let's say, the 4090 example was brought up where they had the 300% greater, that chart was shown, that you would then implement having someone knowledgeable about the product reviewing the videos so that those things don't get caught. But then you see there's more examples. There's another example and another example. And it seems like LMG has got some internal issues there where I guess they're not able to implement that. There's just not the experience there. There's not the right process. There's not the right person there. I don't think it's like Linus's fault specifically. Like it's not on Linus. It's a management and organizational thing at the company and about how they're producing things and how that differs from a company like Gamers Nexus that only has, how many do they have, like 6, 7 employees? There's not as many steps to get content out. So there's a lot, there's going to be people closer to making the content that are involved with some of those production related things.
It's really tough to get the experience that's required to produce day one reviews at the level they need to be produced at now on YouTube. The standard's very high. You can't afford to make silly mistakes, let's say. Little ones, people will forgive you to a degree, like you say, like getting a spec in a table wrong or like the cache figure wrong, like that. They're last minute things that are often done by the editor, though it seemed like it was in the script as well, but that's forgivable. But getting, major things wrong, things that can really impact the conclusion of the product review, that's not good. But it's really an experience thing. And I think people think that benchmarking is very simple and straightforward. I don't want to make it sound like it's rocket science, but benchmarking today is significantly more complex and difficult than it used to be. And again, I don't mean that it's very difficult to run a benchmark. That's not what I mean. I mean making sure that the test system is all up to date and operating as it should be. Because before you even go to test a GPU, you need to make sure that the system itself is behaving as it should be so that it doesn't throw off your comparative data. So there's a bit of work you've got to do there to make sure that it's all in line. And then when you're adding new games, have they been patched? Does the patch introduce some kind of weird bug or problem? We saw Cyberpunk get patched and then all of a sudden it just started enabling FSR by default with the quality preset. although the performance hadn't changed in the game, the presets, if you just left high on high, it was no longer the same as what high used to be. You had to manually go and disable FSR, which then changed the preset name from high to auto. But once you've done that, you then get the same results as what you used to get. So it's just a weird update there where it, and then so many games, even Cyberpunk does this now. For some reason, it just randomly likes to turn on frame generation. So you've got to be on the lookout for that. And I think that's what would have happened in the LTT review, although they said DLSS off. To get 300%, I think they would have had frame generation on. Anyway, I'm not exactly sure what happened there, but my point is there's so many things you've got to look into now. So from configuring the system to making sure that's actually giving you the numbers you need, to making sure that the games are configured the way they need to be, the display drivers are installed correctly and functioning right. There's so much work you need to do just to make sure, to validate that you can now then start benchmarking to get accurate data. So
Yeah.
it's just not like what it used to be like.
And it's intuition that sort of comes from the experience. Like you test so many games over so many years that you've sort of seen it all. It comes to a point where there's not as many challenges that are sort of new and upcoming, and you need to find a new way to respond to things like settings changed. Yeah, that's something that we've seen before. Whereas for someone that's only been doing it for 6 months, a year, 2 years, they may have never encountered a game in that time where something like that would happen. So then you need to, develop a process to deal with that. So as you say, checking the settings every time. And I think it goes beyond that because it's even difficult you could write all these things down in a document and hand it off to someone and be like, these are all the things that you need to be aware of. But that doesn't mean that the person who's doing the testing is going to, have the intuition to deal with slight inconsistencies that may not be documented, because realistically, you can't just make a document that's got, these are all the issues you may encounter and here's all the ways you deal with it. There's always new things coming up.
Yep.
And, I would suggest that if you go back and look at some of our content from 5 or 6 years ago, there's probably things there where, we've noticed problems and issues that in content today is now much better. Like we've solved some of those problems. We've implemented new tests and done things like that, which again is just an experience thing. And, everyone has to start out somewhere. Like it's not bad to be inexperienced. There's, we all started from testing just basically in our bedrooms as a bit of a hobby and for fun years and years and years ago now, especially for you, Steve, being an old man. So for the labs team, I think it comes down to having someone who's very experienced in benchmarking and testing in the way, in a media way. So not necessarily in a corporate way that you would be presenting internally at like an AMD or Intel, but in a for media way. And they should have oversight over the team. I don't know how the LMG labs team works, but some of these issues, for example, like data going out to the script writers that is incorrect, probably would have been caught by someone with 20 to 15, 20 years of experience that was just casually looking at those results and looking over what's the team doing, how they're managing things, just sort of a few spot checks here and there. But again, I'm not 100% sure exactly who's been managing these sorts of things, but it's an acquired skill. It's not something that you can just do straight away, especially at this. I think an important point is it's specifically at the scope that's required for a day one review, where you want to be testing 18 GPUs across 10 games. It's much easier for someone starting out benchmarking to, let's say, they've got 2 GPUs and they're just testing out the latest game. Like they're testing out Ratchet and Clank or something. They're comparing the 2 GPUs. That's much easier to dial down. But when you're scaling that up over so many different GPUs from different vendors, different games, it becomes so much more complicated. And that's where things like experience are really valuable, I guess.
Yeah, and talking about the experience, the comment made by the LTT Labs employee sort of highlighted a lack of experience. And I don't mean because they named Gamers Nexus or Harbor Unboxed. I mean because the claim itself really, in my opinion, only serves to it's going to backfire. It's going to create headaches for you down the track when you claim that we always update all of our data for every single content piece. That right there is a claim that you should never really make. And I'll tell you why. It bites you both ways. Because, as Gamers Nexus pointed out, if you test, let's say, Shadow of the Tomb Raider, which is what we currently use for CPU testing, along with a lot of much newer games, but Shadow of the Tomb Raider is a game that we like to include because it's very CPU demanding. Now, if you test that game the same way, with the same settings, with roughly the same hardware, you should get the same result basically every time. The game's no longer getting updated. There's no driver optimizations for that game. Things like resizable bar coming along may change performance, but let's just, for argument's sake, say that you're using all the same core, configuration stuff. You will get roughly the same. Like if a 7800X 3D using an RTX 4070 gets 168 FPS, if you then run that benchmark again and get a 3-run average a week later, in my experience, you'll pretty much get to the same frame. And the way my validation process works, if I get within like 1 frame of that result, I keep the original result. I deem that margin of error. But basically, the problem that I see them inevitably running into with that claim is they do an RTX 4060 Ti review and get, 160 frames per second for that particular GPU. They then throw that data out and redo it. They should get that same number in a future review of like the RTX 4060. And then people are like, but you said you update your data and you got 168 FPS that time, and then you got 168 FPS this time, which they should. But when people start seeing the same numbers appearing, they'll then question, are they actually doing the thing they claim to do? So you've sort of shot yourself in the foot there from people who don't quite understand that in a lot of these instances, the numbers really shouldn't change. But then on the flip side of that, if you test Shadow of the Tomb Raider in one review and it gets 160 FPS, and then that product gets 168 FPS in the next review, and then it gets maybe 150 in that other one, it's like, well, hang on, why is this same GPU, why are the numbers jumping all over the place? Like, is your testing that inaccurate? So whichever way you come at it from, that claim is just going to bite you on the backside. And we know that because we've been doing this for so long. We know how people react to certain claims and certain things you do. So it's easier just to say that we validate the data because, if you are doing that, that's what should happen. You should get roughly the same data every time. And then when you do see a change, generally you have to investigate and explain. So a few times just recently, people were saying to me with their Intel processor, they get better, Horizon Zero Dawn results than what we were getting. And I'm like, I've tested this every single way and I keep getting the same numbers, but they were getting like 30% better performance than what we were getting. And there's a few different people making that comment. I couldn't work it out. Anyway, I eventually worked out that on the Z790 motherboard that I was using, it enabled resizable bar by default. Whereas the Gigabyte boards disabled it, and they were the only manufacturer to disable resizable bar in Intel Z790 motherboards, and that gave you a 30% boost. NVIDIA eventually addressed that with a driver update that automatically disabled resizable bar for that particular title. But it took a bit of investigation, a bit of back and forth to work out what was going on there. So it could be difficult to, basically my point is there, it's just not a good comment to make because you can end up with the same data time and time again, and people will accuse you of not doing the thing you said you're doing.
I think it's going to be a bigger issue as they start getting more and more into the automated testing. So if you've got this process where you've got data that's being produced by the labs that's going out into videos that isn't necessarily accurate or people should be seeing and removing and checking and making sure it's accurate, and then you're removing another layer, which is you're then, by automating it, you're removing the human looking at the results as they're coming out. Especially with game benchmarking, you're going to be either playing the game using an in-game benchmark pass, you'll be running around, you'll be seeing the actual performance of the system, and then the results will be coming out, or you'll be running in the built-in benchmarks, which produce numbers, which theoretically, if you're doing it manually, you'd put that into your Excel spreadsheet or something every time. You'd start stacking up the results after they start coming in. And with manual testing, as you're going, you're getting this constant feedback of you do a benchmark, you get the feedback, and you can respond to that in real time. So if you go into a game doing an in-game benchmark pass and it's really stuttery for some reason, unexpectedly, you're instantly going to be, what's going on? I've got to investigate that. Is something going wrong? Whereas with automated benchmarking, you're going to be clicking a button and then later there's going to be this giant dump of data, and you're going to have to then be very carefully going through and looking at each individual result to make sure that things make sense. And it becomes easier then to miss that that in-game stuttering result. Like you may have a bad 1% low result or something. You may just overlook it because you've suddenly got 500 results that you have to deal with.
Mhm.
And so if you're compounding like inexperience, maybe not as much oversight as there should be, with all the results are being obfuscated by this black box. And it's not really a black box because they've developed the tool,
Mhm.
but it's when it's running, it's effectively doing things and then giving you information afterwards. It makes it even more difficult to make the data accurate. And that's why we've said in videos previously, Q&As and things like that, that automated benchmarking is very challenging. It's not something that is, and this is why they've spent so long doing it, is that it's not just you write a script and it makes results, especially for game benchmarking. It's you've got to put in thousands of hours to validate these results. You've got to put in all this effort to make sure it works. And then every time a new game gets
Mm.
released, revalidate all the effort, remake it work with your tool. Driver updates, you have to revalidate it. You got to, and every time you do this, you have to be improving the automation tool. And yeah, I just find it very difficult. I find it hard to believe that LMG would be able to solve issues like that in the way that they're sort of currently going about. It just adds another layer that.
Yeah, well, look, I'll say something that I'm very self-aware of that I know sounds very arrogant, but I think the LTT Labs guys will eventually learn or realize what we already know, and that is that you can't automate game benchmarks. Like, you can automate canned benchmarks, but canned benchmarks usually aren't that good. Like, I would say a small selection of the games we test, we bother. Like, I think F1, the canned benchmark there is pretty good, but outside of that, not great. And look, if it was possible to automate game benchmarks, it'd make my life a lot easier, and we would invest. We've certainly got enough money to pay developers to make automated scripts for us and programs. We can already that's within the realm of possibility for us and Gamers Nexus. It's not the way to go about it. It just isn't. If it was, we'd already be doing it. Gamers Nexus would already be doing it.
Yeah.
It's
And
not going to work. I think they will abandon that project eventually. I think they'll eventually realize that what we've been saying is correct. But anyway, I'm happy to be proven wrong on that one, but I don't think it's going to happen.
yeah, and I mean, I've seen some people say, "Oh, they could develop optical analysis tools." So they they're scanning each frame to see whether the benchmark pass completed
God.
correctly, which is like you could do that, but first of all, the validation would be insane on a project
Yeah.
like that. And when we're talking about game benchmarking, you don't want to be waiting months to have your results ready for a game that people are talking about right now. Like you don't
Yeah.
want to be starting to test Starfield and having to validate your optical analysis tools so your results are ready in 2025. Like it's just not. That's challenging. But even if they could get it working, games are very dynamic, and this
Mm.
makes it one of the most difficult things to test. Like if you're just testing Cinebench, it runs the same thing every time. It's rendering literally the exact same frame
Mhm.
every single time. With games, you have to be, especially if you want to test the most intensive areas of the game, which I think is kind of the point of game benchmarking, is to find the most performance limiting section of the game so that
Mhm.
people know that's the minimum performance you're getting in a game. Often that will involve, you can't just, let's say you're taking a game like Grand Theft Auto, an open world game, lots of NPCs, cars and things. The easiest way to do an automated benchmark in the game, so ignoring the built-in benchmark, would be you go out into the desert where there's no one around, you loop a character around in a circle or in a straight line that goes back and forth, and
Mhm.
that'd be easy for your optical analysis tool, and you'd have this in-game benchmark pass. But even then, it's like, how realistic is that pass for people's actual game experience, where they're going to be driving cars in the city, they're going to be shooting people and stuff.
Mhm.
And then we would be testing it in a manual way by going into the city, doing those passes where you're driving with the NPCs in the, in the difficult areas, the more performance intensive areas, but that involves dodging around cars a few times. Like every different benchmark pass will be different. You're dodging a different car. And then automating that would be like, I'm sure AI in the future will be able to do something like that. But again, the time investment is pretty significant. I think uh, putting all this time and effort into doing it on the LMG front is, yeah, it remains to be seen whether it'll be worth it for them. And I think it's contributing to some of these problems that Gamers Nexus has been illustrating in their video. How do I put it? It's like the response from Linus has been consistently throughout this process that, the results are the way they are because they're learning about the labs. It's a process. It takes time to do this thing properly. And so we're still learning and things like that. And I guess my response to that would be, why are they publishing data from an in progress, testing methodology? Like,
Mhm.
why, if they're developing an automated testing tool and it's producing inaccurate data every once in a while, because it's an in progress tool and it hasn't had all the time and everything, then surely that should just be internal for now, and that you should
Mhm.
be reverting back to your older tried and true methodology until the new testing is ready to go. So I think some of those sort of justifications from Linus are, again, it's a bit
I
questionable for me.
I think if they were doing something that nobody else was doing, I think if their day one reviews had every single GPU released in the last 5 years or last 10 years, I think if they were doing something really remarkable, I think that would be somewhat forgivable because they're trying to
Yeah.
do this new thing. They're trying to set a new standard there. If you're going to be using this new method that you believe to be better and allows you to gather more data, you want to be doing a lot more than Harbor, Unboxed, or Gamers Nexus if you're going to make that comparison. So, yeah, as I said, I think I could cut them some slack there. I could certainly cut Linus some slack there if they were just doing something that I'm like, wow, we could never do that. That's quite impressive. The results may not be always 100% accurate, but still quite an impressive achievement. Once they refine that process, that's going to make their review very valuable.
Hopefully what's coming across in this discussion is sort of how much we do genuinely think about testing behind the scenes.
Mhm.
Like, it's not, we're just setting up a system, whacking in a GPU, hitting the go button.
Mhm.
It's that we've had a lot of back and forth discussions about things like testing and presenting data and the best ways to go about that, the ways that are going to be the most efficient. People have probably seen your desk setup, which is just one example of
Mhm.
how can we make manual benchmarking very efficient, is literally to just have systems physically nearby,
Mhm.
to make that process a lot easier. So they have to be proving that their way of doing things is, first of all, suitable for the public right now, and also proving that that way is going to produce new and exciting outcomes for reviews.
Mhm.
And I definitely think that it just compounds all these issues when you're using this in progress early, testing tool. I think maybe we'll get to the point where they could be testing like 50 GPUs in every single GPU review, which would be amazing. It'd be very impressive to see. But that's the time that you'd be wanting to roll out that testing methodology. You'd want to wait. You'd want to make sure it's super well validated, get it all ready. You probably would have seen Gamers Nexus videos about their GPU testing suite updates, where they go through and like, these are all the things we've learned over the last year that we're rolling into our new test suites. We've changed the
Mhm.
games, we've validated them all. That's the time you'd want to be waiting until you get to that point. Whereas sort of, it's almost like, when you hear about developers being like, don't push the beta updates to the main channel for people to use. Like, you want
Mhm.
to you want the main channel that everyone's using to be stable, to be tried and true, to work, to be proven, and you want the beta stuff to be in the background that
Mhm.
maybe you show every once in a while, but is kind of still in progress. I think they've kind of jumped the gun a little bit by too much of that beta work is being pushed into the main channel. And unfortunately, that's impacting some of their results. But I think at least they're aware of it. Like, to give them some credit, it's not like they're sitting around being like, yeah, we're just ignoring that.
Mhm.
Like, they are sort of aware of it, but there's still obviously process issues internally that
Mhm.
are sort of preventing them from making all the changes every time, I guess.
We've known about some of the questionable results in their reviews for a while now, but it's not. Again, we're not the benchmark police. It's not on us to. And I think this was the message I was trying to get across. And I said this in roughly these words. When I made my initial tweet, I replied to my own tweet and I just said, look, guys, you don't need to tell people how good your benchmarks are or how much better they are than anyone else's. Um, your work speaks for itself. Do the best job you can do, a job that hopefully you're satisfied with, and people will recognize that. I mean, I know we get accused of drama a lot, and we're always getting on drama and we're causing drama, and that it's like, I'd say 99% of the time we're responding to people attacking us, or, you know, in this instance, I wouldn't say they were necessarily attacking us, but they were saying something that we didn't believe to be true about us, and therefore we addressed it. But we're
Mhm.
not out there making videos about, this drama and that drama. It's if someone targets us and calls into question our work or whatever, I think we have a right to sort of say, well, that's not accurate, or we don't believe that's
Mhm.
accurate. So I don't think that's creating unnecessary drama. And again, I'm certainly not accusing Gamers Nexus or anyone of doing that either. I thought their video had many valid points, and they obviously felt
Yeah.
compelled to make it.
I think, when you've got a channel like Linus Tech Tips, which is obviously watched by a lot of people, millions and millions of people, pretty much every day watching Linus Tech Tips, their content is very important. Like, it is setting a standard in terms of, like, people are genuinely making buying decisions based off their content. And that's
Mhm,
why it's so important for a channel like Linus to have data that is, it doesn't have to be the most comprehensive. It doesn't have to it doesn't have to get into the depth of a Gamers Nexus video or do a 50 game benchmark like we might do. But at the very least, it should be accurate and informing a good, robust conclusion, because millions of people are probably going to be watching the video,
mhm,
and they may not watch a Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed video, which is totally fine. You don't have to watch our videos. That's fine. So you at least want that content to be valid. And I think, yeah, it's kind of, we don't want to be making those types of videos about a channel that has 1,000 subscribers and just being like, your testing is, done by people with inexperience and is bad quality and things like that. Because if you're an up and coming creator with limited resources, we get it. We've been there.
mhm,
There's only so much you can do. If you're inexperienced as well, you're just learning. It's all part of the process, and you'll get better over time as you make more and more videos and grow your channel. But I don't think any of those excuses apply to a Linus type channel. It just, like, you can't be sitting there saying, well, it's fine because this is the first time they're doing it. It's like they've been a channel for longer than we've been a channel. So
mhm,
they
mhm.
should be making, as you say, sort of accurate data.
Linus, rather. He seemed probably the most upset or disappointed, whatever the feelings were, that Steve hadn't reached out to him privately to discuss all of these issues and go through them and get his response before, I suppose, ambushing him with the video that they
Mhm.
did. Like, I had no idea that video was coming, and I've spoken to Steve recently. Not that he keeps me in the loop with their schedule or anything, but we did talk a bit about my tweet and stuff, and Steve didn't sort of say, oh, I've got more to say about this. He just sort of brushed off as, yeah, we're not touching this one. Um, so yeah, what's your thoughts on that? Like, should Steve have reached out to Linus because he has Linus's phone number? He can directly contact Linus. And people were accusing me of, I should have reached out to Linus before making my little tweet about the thing they'd already said. And I think, well, in my instance, it was already publicly out there. I suppose I could have contacted Linus and said, "What's the deal with this?" But it was on someone else's channel. Is Linus going to get him to remove that and make some sort of apology or something?
I guess it comes down to two factors. Like, I think once something's public, an answer being public is fair game. Like, you don't
Mhm,
want to be taking like a private conversation, a private message, like a DM on
mm,
Twitter or a Discord message or something, and then instigating that into the public field by
mhm,
sort of saying, we chatted to Linus about this and we disagree, but it's all been private up to that point. Like, that's
mhm,
bad. Like, don't do
mm,
that.
mhm,
In that circumstance, you definitely want to be dealing with it as much in private as possible. I think when it comes to things like content, like, it's hard because I'm not the sort of person that would make a video going through the errors that has been made on someone's channel. Again, I'm not saying Gamers Nexus was wrong to do that. It's just not something I personally would have done. So, from my perspective, I guess if I was making a video like that, I think because the content is public and you're largely addressing things that are in the video publicly, and a lot of Linus's responses to the videos, to the errors and things like that are also public. So whether that's WAN show responses, pinned comments, forum threads, whatever, a lot of the time it's not like you're going to get much additional clarity by asking further questions about something that was already resolved publicly in the way that they were happy with. Like,
mhm,
anything that they were willing to have said about an error in a video and clarification, the way they were handling it should have been done way back then, right? Like,
mhm,
what new information are you going to find? However, I also think you probably should be like, behind the scenes, like, hey, we've got some concerns about all these things. Maybe you just email a list of various different things. Be like, do you have any response to this? Which is just a very standard, way of going about investigating. And I don't know whether Gamers Nexus have done that or not. It doesn't have to go into a whole call or conversation or
Mhm.
dealing with it all privately. Like you can still make the video public while having sent that response, which they very well, for all I know, might have done.
Mhm.
But certainly, I don't agree with like this all should have been dealt with privately. I think
Mm.
it is public,
Mhm.
so a public response is fair.
Mhm.
What are your thoughts?
Yeah, it's a tough one. It's a sort of a sensitive, challenging topic, but I think I agree with everything you've said. Like, yeah, a lot of it was already public. I guess, yeah, it would have been more just of a courtesy thing, reaching out to Linus and saying, this is coming. I don't really know how much difference that would have made ultimately. So
Mhm.
if it doesn't make much difference, sort of what's the point? It maybe feels a bit better. I don't know. But as you say, like this, although we get accused of drama, this isn't content we have really made or would make. Yeah, I guess people really want to know, and I've seen this a lot on comments on our existing videos and Twitter. People want to know what our thoughts are, um, and not just the thoughts we've gone through, like whose side are we on? Who do we think's in the right? Who's the bad guy here? And I don't really have, I know people are going to view it as a cop out, but I don't really have a side. I know we got attacked over our comments about LTT. So, we should be all for the GN video, tearing them a new one or whatever. Like, yeah, I'm really conflicted on it. Like, part of it on a personal level annoys me, right? So it's really annoying when a day one review goes live and a really big, trusted, respected media outlet like LTT releases some results that massively contradict our own, which we've seen time and time again. Gamers Nexus pointed out a few of them. And then we get flooded with comments going, you're a crap benchmark. You don't know what you're doing. LTT showed it to be this much faster or this much slower. And, you guys got it wrong. And then I have to point to, well, if you look here at Gamers Nexus, you look here at PC World or someone like that, they've got the same results as us. So has anyone else verified the LTT results? But having to deal with that is a bit annoying because it was unnecessary because they got it wrong. So on a personal level, that kind of frustrates me, and I get annoyed that probably more than we should have, we've seen these bad results. Part of me is like, well, do LTT deserve and does Linus deserve the flack and the blowback they're getting over this sort of stuff? Like,
Yeah, the
yeah,
community is going to blow it up, right? Like
it's brutal. Yeah.
it's going to be um a disproportionate response to what
Mhm.
was actually brought
Well,
up.
look at the drama and the blowback we received over my little cheeky tweet, which you would
Yeah,
think I was, calling for Linus's head, the way the response was on that. But it's the internet. I,
yeah,
I act surprised, but I've been doing this job for 20 plus years now. So, you know, it's like part of me is not at all surprised. And the other part of me is like, how ridiculous.
I
It's
know.
every time. But,
I think I'm on the side of just the community in general. Like it's not. And I know again it's definitely a cop out, right? To sort of say, well, I'm not going to take a side, but
yeah.
I think it's it's good that these things are sort of being brought to light because it is going to encourage LTT to do a better job, which benefits
Mm,
the community.
mhm,
So I think from that perspective, that's sort of the angle that I'd be sort of taking. Sort of saying, well, while maybe I wouldn't have made the video in the exact same way that Gamers Nexus made their video, and as I've said before, I probably just wouldn't be making videos like that, just my personal choice. That in general, it is going to hopefully see the entire reviewing ecosystem improve because it's as well like you see a video like that and you sort of I thought in the back of my head, I'm like, I wonder, if someone made a video about our content in this style of that video, what would they be finding? Right? Like you sort of think if someone's really going to dial into all of our failures and errors, what are they bringing up? And it sort of gives you that encouragement to
mhm,
do a better job, to make
mhm.
sure that every time you're producing videos, you're doing the best possible job. So yeah, I think that's sort of my approach. I think it's not necessarily so much like GN versus LTT. It's like, do you want all content creators to do a better job, or are you content with the level that content creators are producing content at the moment? And I'm certainly on the front of improving.
Yeah, and that's where I sort of come to Steve's defense at Gamers Nexus because while I'm conflicted, I'm those people who are like, that's unprofessional. You shouldn't do that. You should just stay in your own lane and not tear down others or whatever the argument for Steve not doing the video may be. But then on the other side of it, I'm thinking to myself, well, I've already said, we've seen these horrific errors from Linus's team or whoever may have made the errors, but we've seen them get published, which they absolutely should not have been published. And it hasn't happened once or twice. It's happened. It's almost reliable at this point. I know that sounds harsh, but often we just see these results that don't make sense. We're like, how does this keep happening? And as I said, it's frustrating for me as a content creator on the platform. I put out a day one review and then I'm having to field all these questions for why our results don't make sense compared to LTTs. And maybe Steve's just sitting there like, these things keep happening, guys. These things and other things that shouldn't be happening keep happening. Like, we've been quiet on this for so long now and you keep making the same mistakes. So Steve's just like, well, I'm not seeing change, so I'm going to step in here, bring it to everyone's attention, and then maybe that will create change at LTT. Or I'm not sure, but that as you say, that could be some good that comes of this video and this situation where they really take a hard look at what they're doing and they make sure that the next review that comes out doesn't have any major errors. As you said, look, I think I don't know if I've talked about this already, but one of my most recent major errors was for the 13900K video where I did the power scaling compared to the 7950X, and I was using the Intel XTU software, which was supporting that CPU, but had a bug and gave you the wrong power figure numbers. So while I got a bit shafted there, like my mistake, I guess, like I had no really way of verifying that until the review went live. The review went live. I woke up the next morning, found out those results were wrong. We trimmed that from the video. We pinned a comment. That was really the best we could do there. We got rid of it and we made a tweet about it and a pinned comment. So errors happen, but they should be fairly irregular, not regular, I guess is the point.
Yeah. And we don't know, like, I'm sure there'll be, going back to the whole, they should have settled this privately sort of issue. We don't know how much conversation there's been between Steve and Linus or people between those two publications about errors after videos go live. Like, who knows?
Yeah,
maybe they reached out after the 4090 video and were like, hey, that result doesn't look right. And, maybe then there's another video and they reach out and say, hey, that result doesn't look right. And we've certainly received emails from other creators asking things like that or looking to double check numbers. And I've tried to double check numbers with other content creators at times as well. So there is a lot of that going on behind the scenes where we're trying to validate data off one another before publishing so that we don't make big errors. But obviously, I'm sure it gets to a point where you keep saying to a creator like, what's going on here with this result? Wasn't able to replicate this. What's going on with that result? As you say, it probably gets to a point where you're like, I'm not really seeing any change here. And this is obviously impacting people in the community negatively, like they're getting the wrong impression about products and the wrong information. So yeah, I think that sort of informs where the video goes. To the ethical side of the video, did you have any thoughts at all about things like the Billet labs, like cooling block situation? Because I think a lot of the takeaway has been from people that is the worst, I guess, fault that Linus made that was covered by Gamers Nexus.
Okay, so obviously we're mostly focused on the benchmark stuff because that's where we actually got tied up in all of this was, the calling out of the benchmarking methods and practices and whatnot. And I'll just sort of make it clear at this point that I don't watch much LTT content on the main channel or any of their sub-channels, not because I don't like them or think they're not worth watching, just because I only have a finite amount of time and I spend most of it benchmarking. And generally to sort of a bit of background noise, I try not to have tech-related content playing because there's only so much my brain can handle of tech-related content. I pretty much watch all of the LTT day one reviews, so all of their GPU and CPU reviews, because obviously that's what I'm covering. And when I release my video, I go around and watch everyone's. So Gamers Nexus, Linus, everyone's. And yeah, so when it comes to other general content, I will catch like one video a month maybe. And it's usually one that someone's linked and said, Steve, what do you think about this? Or this is worth watching. This was really funny or interesting. But LTT put out just so much content. I don't even know if there is a person on the planet that can actually watch all of it. You wouldn't have a lot going on in your life if that's the case. No offense to anyone. But I haven't watched those videos is the long-winded way I'm trying to get across that message, that I just haven't watched them. So I don't know what happened in those videos. I don't know the full context. So I guess what I'm getting at is the context I have of those videos is from the GN video. So I'm going, I guess I would have to trust that GN has got the context and the information correct in their video, and I'd have to comment on it from that perspective.
Yeah.
So,
I think that's fair.
and what do I think about them? Well, from what Gamers Nexus showed, the Billet Labs thing was bad, and I can see why people are upset about that. It really goes against everything I think that we at Hardware Unboxed stand for and Gamers Nexus, which is really thorough, in-depth, highly researched testing and analysis. We don't just go, oh, what are we going to do today, Tim? Oh, I don't know, run a heap of benchmarks and pump out a video. Like, there's a lot of back and forth with companies. There's a lot of, even back and forth with our peers in the industry like Gamers Nexus. What are they seeing? Do they have any insight into this? That happens a lot. So, and that's why we only put out like 2 videos a week, because a lot of time and effort. I work minimum 16 hours a day, 7 days a week, pretty much every week.
Probably should
Sometimes
cut down on that a bit, but yeah, sure.
I mean, I've been doing that for years now. You know, I do that. Our video editor Balin thinks I'm a bit mad. I love this stuff. Like, I'm an addict. It's hard to pull me away from it. I love doing it. So yeah, I've got a problem, I'm aware, but I also enjoy it. And I've seen about to make it work. I've been doing it for a long time now. But even you put a lot of hours in, like you'll work on a weekend or, it's not a 9 till 5 for you. I know you sometimes say it is, but it's not, because I catch you working at all hours of the night and weekends and whatever.
Well, I was watching the Ashes cricket when that was on in England the other day, and I was just doing benchmarks at like 3, 4 a.m. while watching the cricket. I'm just like, whatever, I'll just do it. Why not?
I know we're getting sidetracked here, but I guess it is the podcast. But I can't watch a movie anymore. I don't know if it's just me being old now as well. There's few things I can do without doing my job. Like, I like to be productive, and I find just going and watching a movie, I'm just like, where's the benchmark to run? What am I doing? I'm just wasting time. So that is, I've probably got a problem. I've probably got a diagnosable problem, but
I'm sure. Maybe a few.
So anyway, what were we meant to be talking about?
The Billet Labs situation.
Right. Yeah. So, the video was very sloppy. The context in which it was shown in the GN video, wow, it was very embarrassing. I don't know if they were trying to be entertaining or funny. Again, I don't have the full context, but them pulling out, if I understood this correctly, Linus told his employees to grab an RTX 3090 Ti. They grabbed what they thought was an RTX 3090 Ti. They then tore the thing down fully. And then only after they had trouble fitting this custom block to it were they like, hang on, what graphics card is this? And they realized it was an RTX 4090 and not the thing they needed, but they proceeded anyway. Is that right?
Yeah, that's the impression I got, and that certainly was.
If that's correct.
Yeah, it reminds me of the cowboy hat emoji. Yeah, the guy with the cowboy hat is like sort of smiling. It's kind of like you're just going with the flow, doing whatever. You're kind of acting like a cowboy.
I mean, that's embarrassing. Again, we're going off the context that was shown in the GM video, but if accurate, that is very embarrassing. I don't know if Linus was playing it up to be a bit funny, like, guys, you've got so many graphics cards over here, you can't find the right one. That could have been the context of the video. I don't know. But if they seriously were meant to be installing this prototype block on a 3090, accidentally got a 4090, those mistakes happen, whatever, but then tore it down, realized their mistake, and then were like, we come this far, we'll just, we'll just keep going, and then we'll complain about it not working properly on a card that the developer said, look, feel free to try it on a 4090, but this is developed for a 3090 Ti. So definitely test it on a 3090 Ti. And if you're happy with the results or found that interesting, then feel free to maybe try it on a 4090. We haven't done that because we don't have one.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's not good content.
Yeah, I think with those videos, like, I'm sure the goal was to be entertaining, as always with a Linus video, which is fine. But I think you can't mix together entertaining content where it's designed, where you're going around, as I said, kind of like a cowboy, just doing whatever, like, we'll whack some things together, we'll see what works, what doesn't work, have a bit of fun. Like, everyone who builds PCs does things like that, like not necessarily installing very expensive hardware on non-compatible, very expensive other hardware, but just messing around, having a bit of fun. Like you build a few things, see what works. DIY mods are always popular. But that's one style of video. That's the entertaining video where you're going around doing things. I think it's wrong to then take that experience and say, well, now we're going to evaluate the product. Because if your experience is, well, I installed it on the wrong GPU, and then you're going to then say, no one should buy this because it's too expensive and is just not worth it. It's just totally incompatible. It has to be one or the other. It has to be an analysis video where you properly install and test the product as intended and say, is this worth it or not worth it? Or you can make the entertaining, let's try and make this 3090 Ti cooler work on a 4090. You can't have it both ways. And I think they really did, screw over that company, unfortunately, by trying to do both things at the same time when really they should have been separated. And this is why we don't make messing around with test systems and things, videos like that, because our videos are review videos effectively. And we can't be, seen doing things like that. We can't be seen like not installing a cooler correctly and then saying, well, this product sucks now. Like that's
right.
just not how a review works. It's just a bad review.
Yeah, when I did the unboxing boxes series and there was no real research, I didn't even know what was in the box most of the time. I would get the product out and I'd be like, oh, okay, this headset doesn't feel as comfortable as expecting it to be, but there's a lot of adjustment there, so maybe I just haven't set it up correctly. I'll look at that later and get back to you guys. That's sort of how I tackled that. And I'd say the only content we fairly regularly do where we're winging it is our live streams. And we stress at the start of the live stream, this is not a build guide. This is not how to build a PC necessarily. We're just doing this in an entertaining fashion while answering your questions and half paying attention to the thing that we're doing. So if things go wrong or whatever, we usually, wear that as, oh, I made a mistake and, we've got to do this. We don't necessarily say, this case sucks because of this or that. We usually just say, oh, we must have made a mistake because we're just winging this and mistakes happen when you wing things.
Yeah, just disappointing to see that sort of video. And some of the other issues as well, like, the Noctua cooler stuff and things, the framework situation as well, something that I've sort of been a bit, curious over is probably the best way to describe that, how you could be testing laptops while also having been an investor in a laptop company seems like a conflict of interest to me. I know they do disclose that, but you can't always just magic away a conflict of interest by disclosing a conflict of interest. The conflict is still there. It's just that people are aware of it. But, it's sort of things like that as sort of, just not the way that we would make content. Like we've said many times previously that, well, first of all, we don't invest in companies that we then test the products of.
No.
Don't really invest in much at all.
I think the closest we get is companies do pay us money. So MSI pays us money, Gigabyte pays us money, and we review their products.
Or ad spots.
Which is a bit of an unfortunate necessity for us. But I think we've proven, like, I remember back when MSI, well, they still do, sponsor us to go to Computex, and a few of our Patreon members were concerned that MSI paying for flights and accommodation and stuff and getting us over there, that we would go soft on them. Fortunately, a month after those concerns were raised, MSI dropped the ball big time on their X570 motherboards and we roasted them to high heaven. So that kind of proved that even if a company does pay us money, we are still, that's a separate thing. They pay for the ad spot, they get the ad spot, but as far as like the product goes, we're happy to destroy their product. And if they get salty about that and don't want to advertise with us anymore, that's their loss, not necessarily ours.
Yeah, we'll just go to that long line of other people that we could get to advertise our videos, which I think is sort of, I think that's sort of where people, I guess, don't understand as much about how the advertising things would work. This is probably an entire podcast in the future talking about advertising and stuff, but just very quickly, I think the difference between like Linus investing in Framework versus MSI buying ads on our channel is that, Linus, by being an investor, has a vested interest in Framework doing well, which means that, they will benefit in the future if their products are good. Whereas MSI buying ads on our channel doesn't give us a vested interest in MSI products being good because we can get advertising from many different sources. Like we're not limited. If they decide not to advertise with us, again, we can choose many other advertisers for our channel.
Yeah.
So there's no like MSI is paying us money, therefore we need to make MSI products good because we don't care. We could just get whoever. Like it could be
Mhm.
Gigabyte, Asus, or even outside of it, we've done ads for products that aren't things we've covered.
Mhm.
There's plenty of different
Yeah.
opportunities for us.
Yeah,
So
all I'm saying is I absolutely understand the criticism and the concern there because I would
yeah,
have the same
oh, of course,
concerns and
yeah,
criticism. But again, this is where I said earlier, your work speaks for itself, and you will not be too hard pressed to find us criticizing MSI products, criticizing MSI in defense of other YouTubers. We've gone after MSI, Gigabyte, and Asus plenty. I think we've probably gone after MSI the most, and then maybe Asus.
I think
Gigabyte's
so.
mostly probably avoided a lot of flack with us. But anyway, I mean, there's been probably some Gigabyte boards we've trashed for sure. But the point is, yeah, we do keep those things very separate. We don't. There's
Mhm.
no consideration about how much money they might have spent with us that year as to whether or not that product's garbage. And you don't have to look too far on the channel to find that what I'm saying is not garbage or BS. It's 100% accurate. So, yeah, the framework situation, less than ideal. And I think there's plenty of things in life that Linus could have invested in that would probably have made him more money. I know he said he was passionate about it. I don't know too much about the frameworks thing, to be perfectly honest. But yeah, um, it it opens yourself up to criticism when you financially back something like that. That
I mean, at least he disclosed it. Like
true, true.
that is one thing. It's who knows who's out there investing in companies and not disclosing it. That would certainly be very, very dodgy. But yes, obviously the best way of going about it is that you just wouldn't open yourself up to those sorts of conflicts. And things like the Noctua, they make Noctua branded products. There's obviously a collaboration between them. Not as concerned about things like that. I think if you've got your review team and your product team separated enough that hopefully, you wouldn't. Yeah, hopefully the person that's working in the labs is very far separated from things like advertising teams, a company of the size of LMG. So things like that don't concern me as much. But yeah, I think the real takeaway from the video for me overall was less on the ethical side of things and more on sort of just the errors and
Mm,
how consistent they've been over time. But I
mhm.
think the GN video was well made. It wasn't like I felt like a lot of the criticisms in there were fair. I didn't really think there was anything I thought was super unfair, like unfairly targeted Linus over something that I thought was minor. I thought all of those things are probably good to bring up. And yeah, I just think that there's some management side things at the company that need to be improved in terms of not rushing videos as much, which really was a key focus that Steve brought up.
Mhm.
Too
Yes, that's a
rushing
big one.
videos,
Mhm.
too much, not as much oversight. These are all things that are fixable, and it's yeah. I just hope that they implement the right sort of changes. And I couldn't imagine what it's like to operate. Imagine Hardware Unboxed operating with 100 employees. Like it would be a very difficult business to manage. And I think moves like Linus stepping down from the CEO position, hiring someone else to run that role, is hopefully going to over time improve the processes at the company so that there's better better things in place. The people who are currently running labs will get more experience and things like that. So I think there's a lot of hope. It's not like Linus content is going to be trash forever because Gamers Nexus has now exposed them. It's like no, I think there's definitely everything that's been mentioned are things that can be solved and improved.
Yeah, and you know, I don't know if sympathy is the right word for it, but we've been on the receiving end of some of this stuff as well, pretty unfairly. Like a lot, there are definitely issues here that need to be addressed, but the amount of hate, backlash, and attacks that Linus and his staff are going to be subjected to is very unfair because they're not bad people. They haven't done anything horrific. I know there's the ethics stuff there. I don't think they've done anything terribly wrong. I know people probably get upset when I say that.
It's not malicious. I think that's the point
No,
that you're trying to make. It's not like they've gone out and they've
and
deliberately been like, Billet Labs, we're just going to destroy that company. Like, we're out to get them. It's
no,
not that.
and
It's
Linus has said Linus did say in his response that they were financially compensating those guys and trying to help and work with them to rectify the situation. This has been an ongoing effort, and there was some miscommunication there with the whole auctioning the part off for charity and stuff like that.
Yeah, that was clearly a communication breakdown.
I'm just
Something,
taking,
yeah,
I'm taking Linus at his word there, but I believe Linus to be a good guy. I do, and this is sort of separate to this issue what I'm about to say. But we often get people either on our Discord or in our comment section or on Twitter reaching out to us saying, Linus's team or Linus himself stuffed this up again. They're the absolute worst. They're misleading. They're anti-consumer. They're just the worst thing ever, is what they're trying to say. And you guys should do a hit piece and tear them down and do all this and that. And obviously, we've never done that. And we've been asked live when we're doing our Patreon live streams, what do you guys think of Linus and LTT? Like, I think they're personally the worst ever because of reasons. What do you guys think? And we've had plenty of opportunities to, rip or talk poorly of Linus, behind his back or even on the main channel. We haven't done that because I honestly believe, when we've been asked about this is what I've said in the past, and I think you agree, Tim, that I think Linus and LTT, or the organization in general, has been of net benefit for the PC industry and consumers. I think the good they've done certainly outweighs any issues. And I'm not saying they shouldn't be criticized for those issues, because if they haven't been improving through their own sort of processes, then someone probably should point that out and help them along. But I think they've done a good thing for PC gaming and PC. I think because of Linus, there's a lot more people now who, they're almost like a gateway for GN. I think there's a lot more people now who research their parts and what they're buying. There's a lot less people who are sucked into the marketing. I mean, again, I know that people who disagree with me, but this is my opinion. I think, there are a lot more people now who are looking at other resources, doing research, building their own computer, learning about how computers work, and just getting more involved in the whole process than they would have if they hadn't have found Linus. And I think there's just a bigger audience on YouTube and in general for tech stuff. I think that, a lot of us have Linus to thank for blowing up that hobbyist, enthusiast type industry and making it what it is today. I think he plays a big part in that. And I think that should be recognized. And again, it doesn't excuse any mistakes or anything that they've done wrong. But I personally think Linus is of net benefit. And I hope that they can tighten up and improve on these things, because that'll be great for them and everyone else.
Yeah.
And that's basically my thoughts on Linus and
I agree.
LTT.
Yeah, I agree. I certainly think that, content, like, I think we both acknowledge that hardware unboxed content isn't the most approachable for a newcomer. It's not necessarily designed for a new to PC building audience. It very much gets into it.
Yeah, I'm surprised anyone sits through that many graphs, to be honest. I never thought it would work on YouTube.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. But so I think Linus definitely has, I agree, produced a net benefit overall. And sort of proven that PC gaming and building PCs can be an interest for many, many people and work on a YouTube platform, something that prior to that point was really, there weren't TV shows being made about building PCs. I mean, there might have been, but the majority of it was being done. No one watched them. The majority of it was magazines, niche websites, and bringing those things out into the mainstream has certainly, been of benefit. And I think as well, like, while there are a lot of errors in videos, it's been rare that I've found that the conclusion has been all that different to a Gamers Nexus or Hardware Unboxed.
That's fair.
There have been times that, yes, some of the margins haven't been right and some of the results haven't been right. But I think it's rarely resulted in, let's say, Linus saying that a 4090 was bad when everyone else was saying that it was good, or vice versa for any sort of product. I think their opinions, their actual conclusion at the end after analyzing their data has been similar to most other creators. Now, there's probably some examples where, yes, they've made some opinions that don't align with a lot of other reviews, but I think for the most part, despite the errors, their conclusions are still reasonable, which is why it's like, again, we want them to improve and get better, but it would be a net negative if they were constantly misinforming people and saying like bad products are good or good products are bad constantly. But that's just not the sort of thing that I've experienced. And I certainly think if they can improve the data so that it's always accurate, it's just going to take those sorts of conclusions to the next level. It's going to make them even more robust, and people are going to rely on them and trust them even more. I'm sure their trust is unfortunately going to take a bit of a hit after this. But for the future, if they can improve, then it's certainly only going to go up from there, I would have thought.
Yeah, that's right. And while taking a bit of a hit to the credibility or whatever is probably, I'm honestly not even sure how much that'll affect Linus and his platform, to be honest. But again, as I said, your work speaks for itself. So if they start from this point on, if they start churning out high quality day one reviews, doesn't have to be all the data in the world, but if they start churning out accurate reviews with good data, then this will just become a thing of the past. And a year from now, people, the vast majority of people will have forgotten or just not bring it up anymore.
That's probably enough on the GN LTT video, just taking a bit of a break, got back into it. And yeah, I thought might be nice in some of these videos, podcasts, I should say. It's not video first, it's audio first. Just to talk about some of the other stuff that's going on in our lives, things that we might be interested in, maybe videos that we've been watching, movies, TV. So hopefully we'll be able to bring something that's not, benchmarking related in each of these podcasts. Steve's laughing. Have you only been doing benchmarking in the past little bit?
Well, I kind of just admitted that I spend way too many hours 7 days a week doing this sort of stuff, which is entirely true, especially for this time of year. Look, when we get into summer, I try to take half a day here and there to get outside, do some gardening. I have quite a big property. The grass is starting to grow again, so I have to mow the lawns more than once a month. But honestly, the weather's been pretty miserable. It's quite a nice day at the moment, Tim. I wouldn't mind getting outside and enjoying it, but that's fine. We'll do our podcast. But yeah, the weather's been terrible. There hasn't been really much to do. My kids and that have been mostly sick over the last month, just colds and things going around. So they haven't really wanted to do too much. And we usually get out the front of the studio. There's a basketball ring. We play basketball and stuff after school. But again, it's been miserable. So we haven't been able to do that. So there hasn't been much going on. I've been playing a bit of Fortnite with Zoe. She loves that. That's one thing we can do is play computer games. So we've been doing a bit of that when I get a chance here and there. But yeah, other than that, I spent Thursday night, I hopped in my car. I drove for an hour and a half down to PLE, bought an entire computer to get my hands on the 7900 GRE. I drove home. I got home. I set the system up. Well, I took the graphics card out, put it in my test system, started benchmarking. So I did that Thursday night till I passed out, woke up relatively early Friday, and worked all day on it. And when did I get that out? Was it Saturday night?
I think it was Saturday night. Yeah, pretty good effort.
Yeah, so I spent almost 2.5 days getting that done with very little sleep. And then I was very grumpy on Sunday. I'm too old for this, I've realized. I don't do it as well as I used to. So I was sort of pretty hungover looking.
It was Saturday night, right, that your AFL team as well lost in a pretty heartbreaking fashion. In the for people who obviously are not from Australia, we have got Australian rules football here, and we both watch it a fair bit, which we'll probably talk about in future podcasts. But yeah, your team lost a bit of a heartbreaker.
Yes. So that, I worked my backside off. The video went out at 9 and the game started at like 7:30. And after the first quarter, I had to go make sure the upload had worked because that's how tight I was to getting that video out. So I wasn't able to fully enjoy the football. The first quarter also sucked because Melbourne didn't play very well. So I was a bit bummed out by that. Then got the video set up and ready to go live. And yeah, then I maintain they won that game, so that's fine. In my own little world, they won that game. Petrarca kicked that goal. It wasn't touched. It was a goal. So we won. So we won.
Yeah, fortunately, the record books don't say it that way. But yeah, I think my thing from this week that I was really getting into was actually the Women's World Cup in the FIFA, the soccer, which I'm not a huge fan of. I'm not a huge fan of football or soccer in general. It's not really a men's or women's sport thing. I'm just not a huge fan of the sport. But Australia, for once, is actually okay at women's soccer, it turns out. So I've been watching some of those matches. I think it was on Saturday, around the same time as your heartbreaker, that there was the Australia versus France match, which was won by Australia on penalty shootout. That was very stressful to watch. As someone that's not super experienced with watching penalty shootouts and seeing that, I'm like, yeah, I might explode here. But turns out I didn't. I held together. My skin is still okay, and there's a bit of yelling once they kicked it through, and they're through to the semi-finals now. So yeah, that's sort of Yeah, that was good over the weekend. I'm sure in the future we'll talk about some movies and games and stuff. But yeah, for now it's been the FIFA Women's World Cup, and I'll be very interested to watch the semi-final, which I think is on Wednesday. Good time for us, it's
Okay.
hosted in Australia, so they're not at 2 a.m., 3 a.m. like a
Mhm.
lot of other international competitions. So yeah, I've been really enjoying that. And yeah, I think the 7900 GRE is probably something we would have talked about on this podcast in a bit more depth if it wasn't for other
Mhm.
topics taking the main focus. I'm sure sometime in the future we'll talk about AMD's weird product strategy and
Yes.
lineup and things. So we'll save that
Mhm.
for a future time because there's probably a fair bit to say. And I'm just
Mhm.
looking at the time. We've been going for an hour and 26 minutes. So who knows how long this will edit down to. I said we'll make these podcasts an hour long, and as expected, Hardware Unboxed, we make a lot of long, interesting content, hopefully. So we kind of failed on the keeping it short and sweet, but a
Yeah,
lot of
we don't.
stuff to talk about in the first episode.
Yeah, we don't do that. I reckon there's about 2 minutes maybe that you can chop out.
Yeah, 2 minutes. We'll see. We'll see what happens there. So yeah, hopefully everyone's enjoyed the first episode of the Hardware Unboxed podcast. Again, if you're watching this via the video version, please subscribe to the channel that you're currently watching this from. But if you, for whatever reason, aren't super keen on the video version, there's the audio versions available. We'll get those up through Spotify and places like that as soon as we can figure it out. So hopefully by the time you're watching this, we will have figured that out and you'll be able to just subscribe in your podcast apps and things like that. So fingers crossed I managed to get that to work. And yeah, we'll be coming back next week to talk about whatever news happens, interesting topics. Yeah.
Yeah, hopefully there'll be some light-hearted topics we can have a bit of fun with, and it won't be so serious and yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's the goal of the podcast, right? To talk about
Yeah,
some things in a bit of a
yeah,
light-hearted fashion. Just so happens we have to talk about Gamers Nexus and Linus and people and our opinions on that. But
yep.
yeah, hopefully people enjoyed it. So yeah, thanks for watching. There's not much else to say. We haven't got like an outro or anything. There's nothing queued up for this. So we'll just say, see you later.
See you guys.